The story began the moment the main heroine got lost while running an errand. Now, the girl stood near a slightly ajar room and accidentally overheard a conversation. The men inside were discussing how Essen had disappeared and that it was simply terrible. They needed to find him by any means necessary. The heroine was horrified by what she had just heard. Suddenly, a vase slipped from her hands, shattering immediately and drawing attention. The people in the room clearly heard the sound of the falling vase. They asked who was there. The heroine immediately panicked, thinking she had been caught and that death awaited her. At that very second, the doorstep in front of her swung open. Seeing 3 men, she instantly sensed her imminent end. To their left stood the prince's closest confidant and the heir to the Marquisate of Oviedo. This young man was named Terni Aguirre Oviedo. On their right stood the emperor's knight and a brilliant swordsman. This man was called Diano Shabi Benedetto. In the center stood the sole heir of Apennino, Adrian Brest Kettle van Jackel Eppenson. At that moment, the heroine thought she had simply come on an errand for Her Highness the Princess. Adrian immediately asked her who she was. The frightened girl declared that she belonged to Lupin Palace, but the man repeated that he hadn't asked about that. He had asked who she was. The girl added that she was nobody, just an ordinary lady-in-waiting. The man exhaled and smiled. Then he drew his sword and declared that enough words had been said. She should just die. The next moment, he swung his sword at the girl to kill her. The heroine, terrified, screamed loudly. At the very last moment before the strike, Turney stopped him. He grabbed his arm and asked him to stop. If someone died here, it would raise huge suspicions. Because of this, they needed to be far more cautious. Adrian considered that this was indeed true, though he didn't like it. He lowered his sword, and the girl grew even more frightened. Then he asked her how long she had been listening. The heroine tried to speak, but was still afraid of him. The man warned her not to even think of lying at that moment. The terrified girl then admitted she had been listening since the moment his fiancé ran away. The man pointed his sword at her again and asked if that was all. The frightened heroine added that she had also heard that the fiancé was actually a disguised man. Everyone in the room froze at this. They didn't know what to do with her. The man declared that this wouldn't do. She needed to be killed quickly. He immediately swung his sword to finish the girl off once and for all. But suddenly, the heroine dropped to her knees, bowing before the man, begging him to spare her, promising she would do anything for him. Her words greatly intrigued Adrian. He asked if she was truly willing to do anything. The girl then stood up and said that, of course she would. After her words, he began closely examining the girl's face in front of him. Then he sighed deeply and said, "Fine." He added, "Then it'll be you." She wondered in her mind what he was talking about. The man continued, saying that her hair color was similar and her eye color matched too. As for her appearance, they'd figure something out. They could also do something about her voice if they tried hard enough. Or perhaps she should just stay silent, and that would be that. The girl grew curious and asked what the man wanted from her. Adrian smiled at this and said that she would become his future fiancée. And just like that, the main heroine became the fiancée of the crown prince. Sometime later, the prince sat with his friend over a cup of tea. The man was reviewing a report about the main heroine. Her name was Viola Bilbaora, and she was a fallen aristocrat. Turney remarked that there was nothing unusual about her. She seemed genuinely innocent. The prince immediately tossed the papers aside and wondered why he had to marry at all. All he wanted was to kill everyone. He had grabbed Essen and forced him to play the role of the fiancé. Though admittedly, he had a nice face. But who could have thought he'd run away, claiming to be a knight with pride? He thought that once he inherited the throne, all this would end. He just had to endure until then. Then he turned to his subordinate and asked how the search for Essen was progressing. The man replied that Diana was searching diligently. After that, the aristocrat asked why he was sitting there. He was curious about the girl's training. Turney remarked that he should be given a little rest, as he was being used every single day. But the prince wouldn't hear it and immediately ordered him to go train her. The subordinate asked why it had to be done now. There was no need to rush, but once again his superior was unsympathetic and told him not to think that way and to get to work immediately. As a result, Turney remarked that he truly had no rest. The prince added that he should take responsibility and return with something usable. The young man immediately stood up to carry out his master's will. He declared that he would do everything, addressing the man as Your Highness, the Crown Prince. Meanwhile, events unfolded rapidly for the main heroine. In a single morning, her world had completely changed. Just that morning, she had been a simple personal maid. Now she was the Crown Prince's fiancé. The heroine sat alone in the estate, reflecting on all these situations. Her mind was swirling with thoughts about who she was now and where she was. Suddenly, the silence of the room she was in was broken by a young man. He said he had hopes for her, calling her little sister. Then he waved at her and declared that he was now her older brother, named Turney. The heroine thought, "What nonsense is this?" This man had suddenly become her older brother. Anything could happen in life. The young man then asked if she knew he was her older brother. The girl only smiled at him, thinking to herself, "Forgive me, but I don't want to know anything about this." Right now, the girl was only worried about the situation she was in. After yesterday's events, she had been locked in the Lily Palace, the place where the Crown Prince's fiancé lived and was trained in the customs of the imperial family. The heroine lay in her bed, thinking about how she had been told to rest so she could start work tomorrow. But she hadn't slept all night. How could she, under these circumstances? They had also told her that since she was now the fiancée, she had to master general knowledge. They had burst into her room early in the morning and dragged her here. Now the girl sat with her so-called older brother, drinking tea. The heroine thought it was hard to believe this was really happening. Everyone except her seemed completely unfazed. The young man addressed the heroine, saying that even though she already knew, he would explain again for clarity. First, he was Turney Agida Oviedo, and from this day onward, she was Atienne Chevel Rabat Oviedo. This meant everyone would believe she was the hidden daughter of the Marquis of Oviedo. The heroine was shocked by these strange words and asked what he was talking about. Then she recalled hearing about this story, rumors of the Marquis's sudden youngest daughter. Still, she thought the sudden appearance was odd. Who could have imagined the circumstances would turn out like this? The young man continued, saying that if Essen hadn't escaped, they wouldn't have had to go through all this trouble. But then he added that it wasn't quite like that. If he hadn't run away and she had found out, she probably would have died. The girl realized that Essen was the Crown Prince's personal knight. Most likely, that was the name of the man who had been the prince's fiancé. So the beloved fiancé was actually a disguised man. The heroine was deeply upset by this situation. She wondered why they had been discussing this when she stumbled upon them. Honestly, she didn't care if the Crown Prince's fiancé was a man or a woman. She just wanted to be left alone and unbothered. Turney continued, saying he felt sorry for her too. How could she have gotten caught in such an absurd moment? With tears in her eyes, the heroine told him he shouldn't even talk about it. But the young man pressed on, saying she still had a lot to learn. He warned her to remember everything well if she didn't want to die. She only had 2 weeks until the ball. The girl was horrified and asked if she really only had 2 weeks. Smiling, he confirmed that she had heard correctly. No matter what, she had to resemble Essen in that time. She had to perfectly play the role of the fiancé, just as that man had done before. Only then would she survive. His words terrified her even more. She immediately thought of the prince. Could she even survive this? The heroine then declared firmly that she understood and would remember everything. She addressed her so-called brother as Your Grace, Lord Oviedo. He smiled and said such formalities weren't necessary. They were siblings now, and she could address him however she liked. Smiling, she said she would call him brother then. He said that was perfect, and since she had been a personal maid, she must already know the faces of aristocrats. The girl admitted she knew them in general terms, but her brother warned that if she only knew them generally, she would die. The girl quickly laughed and insisted she knew them very well. As the heroine and her teacher sat discussing, the Crown Prince entered. He asked if their training was nearly complete. His subordinates smiled and confirmed they were almost done. The heroine was surprised. Hadn't they just started? Her future husband then stared intently at the girl's face. Their eyes met, and they gazed at each other for a long time. The heroine wondered if she had done something wrong. Was that why he was looking at her? After a while, His Highness turned to his subordinate and told him he could leave, pointing at the door. This training wasn't urgent right now. Then he grabbed the young man and dragged him out. Turney protested, saying he had just claimed it was urgent, but the prince was unyielding and pulled him out. Before leaving, the man glanced once more at his future wife. It was a cold look that sent a shiver down her spine. She still didn't understand why he stared at her like that. Moments later, the door slammed shut in front of her. She stood there, confused, wondering what had just happened and why he had looked at her so strangely. 2 people were responsible for the heroine's training in this estate. The first was her so-called brother, Turney Oviedo. The other was a woman. This woman approached the heroine and introduced herself, saying her name was Lucy. She was Miss Etienne's personal maid and insisted on being called Madame Lucy. Then she asked if she was now her maid. Lucy then told the girl not to worry about the ball happening in just 2 weeks. If the girl trusted her, she would ensure she outshone everyone there. She added that the girl's body shape was different, so all the clothes would need adjustments. The heroine asked in surprise if all of them really needed altering. Lucy confirmed it. The girl immediately thought this lady wasn't as simple as she seemed at first glance. The girl kept wondering if this woman also knew the secret. It was unlikely she didn't. But who knew for sure? Deciding to act, the heroine asked directly, addressing the maid as Madame, and asking if she knew the Crown Prince's fiancé was a man. Lucy laughed and said of course. She had been the one disguising him. The heroine realized she was indeed in the know. Sometime later, she and her mentor entered the dressing room. The woman immediately began taking the heroine's measurements. She explained that they needed to adjust the dress for the ball, the one celebrating Her Majesty the Empress's birthday in 2 weeks, as soon as possible. And this dress was truly magnificent. The girl only needed to see it once to want to wear it, even in her dreams. She realized the ball she had to attend was the Empress's birthday celebration. As Madame Lucy recorded the measurements in her notebook, she mentioned that Mr. Essen had also liked the dress. What a shame he had disappeared so suddenly. The heroine sensed a strange tension in her words. The heroine asked what she meant by between them. The woman clarified that she meant between Mr. Essen and His Highness, Crown Prince Adrian. They had a special relationship. It turned out they had been friends since childhood. The heroine wondered if it had really been just friendship. Lucy continued, saying His Highness had declared he wouldn't attend the ball with anyone inferior to Essen. The mentor then reassured the heroine not to worry. She would adapt soon and never be caught. Then she added that the measurements were finally done. Lucy cheered up and exclaimed that they needed to find the right corset for the new Miss Adi. The heroine wondered what would happen to her training now. Adrian Brest, Kettle. Van Jackal Appensen was the crown prince of the Apennino Empire. He was widely praised as the sole heir, expected to become the perfect future emperor. There was no question about his intelligence. He was talented in all fields. Moreover, being born of the Empress, he was the ideal heir by tradition. Rumor also had it that his appearance was flawless. But he had one serious flaw that people didn't know about: his terrible personality. The heroine wondered how such rumors hadn't spread. Hiding such an awful temperament should have been impossible. It was astonishing. Above all, the crown prince greatly disliked women. Despite pressure, he had continued to avoid marriage, until fate brought him a partner. His chosen one was Adiet Chevel Rabat Oviedo. She was the suddenly revealed daughter of the Marquis of Oviedo, a family that had only produced sons for 5 generations. The heroine didn't know what tricks they had used, but people didn't question her sudden appearance. In reality, that daughter had been a disguised man. The heroine couldn't have imagined such a thing even in her dreams. But why had he run away? Perhaps he couldn't stand the prince's unbearable personality either. Smiling, the girl thought there might be some truth to that. Now she fully understood why the fiancé had fled. Suddenly, her future husband addressed her. The girl snapped out of her thoughts and asked what he wanted. He asked what she had been thinking about so deeply all this time. The heroine wondered if she had been lost in thought too much and hadn't heard what the man said. She immediately started stammering, realizing she had to answer but hadn't heard a word. Adrian began drawing his sword and asked if she wanted to die alone here. The heroine tried to excuse herself, saying she had just been lost in her feminine thoughts. But the crown prince was merciless. If she was lost in thought, she must truly want to leave this world. The heroine immediately dropped to her knees, begging for mercy, admitting she was wrong. Turney smiled at that moment and told Adrian to stop joking with her like that. The girl looked up, wondering if he had really been joking, but the man was still holding his sword. How could that be a joke? The prince then told the girl to repeat what he had just said. She hesitated. How was she supposed to know? She glanced at the people beside the man, silently pleading for help with her eyes. But Diano immediately turned away, pretending not to notice her. Then she looked at her so-called older brother, thinking he should help her again. Did he really want his sister to die like this? She kept staring at him with desperate, pleading eyes. The young man understood her plea for help and pointed to his mouth. Moving his lips silently, he tried to form a word she should say. From what she saw, the heroine read the word date. The crown prince addressed his future fiancée again, asking if she would answer him. Flustered, the heroine stammered, date with me, perhaps? But the man immediately asked what nonsense she was spouting now. The heroine grew even more terrified, thinking this was surely the end. She glared at the smirking young man who had given her the word. Had he set her up by suggesting such a thing? The prince continued, saying that despite giving her several chances, she had failed him. The heroine begged for mercy, apologizing, wondering when he had ever given her a chance. The man then declared that she seemed foolish. Would she even be useful? She'd probably be caught immediately. Turney interjected that this was better than nothing. The heroine thought. They say it's not the barking dog that bites, but the quiet one wagging its tail, referring to her so-called brother. After a while, Diano joined the conversation. He said that, judging by everything, she wasn't lacking in wit. The prince asked if he was defying him now. The young man replied that of course not. How could he dare oppose his orders? But the crown prince repeated that he had defied him. His Sobesednik insisted he hadn't. The heroine thought he'd pretended to help, but he turned out to be utterly useless. If anything, it seemed the prince had grown even angrier because of it. The girl then concluded that she was surrounded by enemies who couldn't kill her yet and were eagerly waiting for her to slip up. She prayed to God. She didn't want to die. Turney turned to His Highness and asked whether he would marry that girl or not. The prince retorted, asking if he wanted to die too. Hearing this, the young man immediately apologized. Meanwhile, the heroine wondered who that girl was. The men continued discussing something among themselves while the girl sank into her thoughts. She realized they probably wouldn't tell her. Then someone reported that the princess was looking for her maid. She had gone on an errand but never returned. The prince immediately said he had recently ordered it to be announced that she had simply died. But now he declared that no one would believe such nonsense. She didn't look convinced. The prince said he'd deal with it somehow. The young man sighed, remarking that he'd been given another difficult task. At that moment, Diano addressed His Highness, suggesting that if he planned to kill her, he should do it quickly and dispose of the body. The heroine hadn't expected this turn of events, she thought. Should I sew his mouth shut? How dare he decide my life like this? The crown prince asked what nonsense he was spouting now. He asked if he wanted him to marry that crazy girl instead. The young man paled and begged His Highness to watch his words. How could he say such terrifying things? He said he'd rather die than marry that girl. But Adrian replied that he didn't have to die. The heroine thought she was jealous. She wanted to live, yet they were casually discussing her murder. Gathering a bit of courage, the girl tried to interject into their conversation. She asked, "Do you really need a fiancé?" All this time, the crown prince had endured pressure just fine without one. On the contrary, people were more surprised by the sudden fiancé he had brought to them. Now the heroine sat thinking that they didn't need to go this far to find a replacement. After a while, the prince declared that, of course, he needed one. The girl was surprised and asked why that was. The man told her, "Do you need to know that?" She quickly said no. He then told her to focus on her own tasks. The frightened heroine agreed, saying she would do just that. Turney stepped in, asking why the man was treating her like this. She might be curious. He explained that Her Majesty wanted His Highness to marry as soon as possible. Until now, he had avoided marriage by using his youth as an excuse. But now, in his 20s, that excuse no longer worked. The heroine realized that was the reason. Until now, he had avoided marriage by using his youth as an excuse. But now, in his 20s, that excuse no longer worked. The heroine realized that was the reason. The young man continued, saying that, on top of that, Her Majesty wanted the prince to marry a specific girl, one who was very unusual. At these words, the prince declared he'd rather destroy the empire than make that crazy girl the crown princess. The heroine sipped her tea, thinking he must truly hate her. His Majesty asked his subordinates if they had found Essen. One replied that they hadn't yet. Turney smirked and said it was probably because the prince had been too rough in bed. At this, the heroine nearly dropped her tea. She hadn't wanted to hear such details. The girl immediately blurted out, "In bed?" Then she turned bright red with embarrassment. Realizing she had drawn attention, she muttered that she was just air and they should continue. The prince asked since when air could talk. Smiling, she agreed it was odd. The prince then said sadly that his personal guard had run away. Since he had chosen to leave, finding him would likely be difficult, Diano suggested he might have gone home. But Adrian said that was unlikely. He had already contacted his family, and he hadn't returned. He sighed sadly and added that they needed to find him soon. Turney cheerfully exclaimed that they had a replacement now. Why rush? The prince glanced at the girl and asked if he really believed in her. The heroine just smiled back at him. The man continued, saying that, regardless, they had to make her useful. He told the girl she had just 2 weeks to survive the celebration of Her Majesty the Empress's birthday. At this, the heroine asked what would happen if people realized she was a fake. Adrian replied that she would die, or just drop dead. So she had to do her best to avoid that. The heroine listened carefully to her future husband's words and agreed to try, but her expression was fearful after his harsh words. Soon after, the girl and her first mentor left the room. They then reached the place where she had been training all this time. Turney smiled at her and said they should chat like a friendly brother and sister. The heroine only smiled back, thinking, where does he see a brother and sister here? They were strangers with no drop of shared blood. She needed to escape soon. The young man in front of her suddenly turned and asked what Adi was thinking about. He wondered if she was considering running away. The heroine smiled and asked what escape he was talking about, thinking, can he read my mind? She then asked what would happen if she were caught escaping. She was curious about what they would do to her. Her interlocutor remarked in surprise that obviously her head would roll. The heroine said she understood. Then she asked her Sobesednik if Adrian had any mercy at all. He replied that the fact she was still alive was his mercy. The heroine stared at him in disbelief, thinking, what kind of mercy is that, according to him? Her mentor then told her not to mind it. He added that her big brother could survive teasing Adrian, but she couldn't afford to do that. He said he had high hopes she'd live a little longer, calling her his dear little sister. From that day on, the heroine completely abandoned all thoughts of escape. Whether Turney had mentioned execution on purpose or not, she believed his words were true. In the days that followed, the girl threw herself into her studies, all to stay alive. Currently, the heroine was learning about the affairs of the imperial palace and the etiquette all aristocrats followed without exception. At least coming from fallen aristocracy, she could keep up with the program. Otherwise, she'd probably have died by the prince's hand already. The lessons the heroine attended were quite harsh, but she was glad to complete them. The more she learned, the higher her chances of survival. Madame Lucy constantly came to ask the girl about dresses. It annoyed the heroine. She wondered what dresses she was talking about when she needed to study, so she kept hearing Madame Lucy's incessant laughter. Lucy kept coming and asking if this dress was pretty, or that one was. The girl always said they were pretty, but she wondered when they would start real training. She thought it didn't matter if the dresses were pretty or not. It had nothing to do with her survival. She just needed to study now. The woman responded to such questions by saying everything was fine. She felt the girl would handle everything perfectly. The heroine thought, how can I handle it when I don't know anything? One day, someone knocked on their door. Both turned toward the entrance, and the woman called for them to come in. It was Diano, who had come that day to check on how the heroine's training was progressing. As always, the woman laughed and said everything was going perfectly in their training. But the heroine didn't like those answers. She thought, what's perfect about this? Diano said that if it was true, everything was going great. And then he left their room. At that moment, the heroine thought it was sheer negligence. Shouldn't he have thoroughly checked her preparation for the event before leaving? Several days had passed since Atienne's training began to become the perfect replacement crown princess. Crown Prince Adrian sat in his study reflecting. He thought that while he hadn't expected much, things were progressing surprisingly smoothly. He mused that although the girl looked lost and weak, Atienne was clever. She grasped situations well and had decent abilities. Another good thing was that she knew how to adapt to any situation. Perhaps because her life was on the line, reports said she absorbed lessons quickly. The man continued sitting in his thoughts, considering that, naturally, she was trying not to die. But logically, using her was becoming more beneficial. The crown prince discussed all these things with his subordinates. Hearing this, Tournier said it might be because she was originally an aristocrat. Their Ati was quite capable. These words surprised the prince, and he thought, they're not real siblings. He realized there was no need for Tournier to show care by calling her our Ati. He then asked what she was capable of. Being crown princess? The young man said, probably not. Surprised by this answer, the prince asked what she was capable of then. Tournier replied that she was just capable of being his sister. The prince grew furious at this mocking attitude, thinking he might kill him right then. After a brief pause, he decided against it. It wasn't the time, and if he killed him, too many unwanted tasks would fall on him. Tournier continued his cheerful tales, saying he was so glad to finally have such a cute little sister. Even better, she always listened to him. Another man in the room started to say it was because he threatened her, but Tournier covered his mouth. Then he turned to Adrian again, saying that dance lessons were finally starting today and asking if he'd join her. The prince asked in surprise why he would do that. Calling him an idiot, Tournier remarked that he probably wouldn't go then. He added that there was nothing to be done. Her generous older brother would manage on his own. Pretending to cry, he said his poor sister was quite pitiful. Adrian listened to this nonsense and thought he was certain Viola had annoyed Tournier at first. Now he was very curious why his attitude toward her had changed so drastically. Elsewhere in the estate, Madame Lucy told the heroine that she had ordered 50 sets of clothes to start with. The girl asked in shock if it was really 50 sets. She wondered if she'd even wear all those dresses once in her lifetime. The woman said that since it was her first order, it was quite modest. Then she laughed again with her infectious laugh. She said that next time they'd buy 200 outfits, adding that picking them out would be so much fun. These statements greatly shocked the heroine. She thought it seemed like Lucy just wanted to play dress up with her. The woman added that tomorrow they'd pick out accessories too. With those words, she completely overwhelmed the heroine. The girl was very angry at this point. Lucy's contagious laughter would soon drive her to a nervous breakdown. Someone knocked on the door of the room they were in. The woman immediately called for the person to come in. It was her assistant who whispered something in her ear. Lucy laughed her infectious laugh again and asked the girl to sit for a moment. Then she left the room with the assistant. Now alone in the room full of dresses, the heroine marveled at the sheer extravagance of it all. She began examining the room she'd been in all this time, picking up dresses and studying them closely. She thought it had been burdensome for her to buy even one cheap dress. After a while, the heroine schemed that it wouldn't hurt if she stole just one. But then she immediately recalled the prince's harsh gaze and realized her life would end if she did. She'd better abandon that idea. A considerable amount of time passed, and the heroine wondered why Lucy was taking so long. She then headed toward the door her second mentor had gone through. Approaching the door, the heroine heard voices. One woman said she'd heard Lady Gabrielle had gone to Her Majesty the Empress. Her interlocutor asked in surprise if she'd done it right now, noting that she visited too often. From what she heard, the heroine pondered. So Gabrielle was a lady from the Chancellor's family. She wondered if she was the crazy girl the Crown Prince had mentioned. One maid then asked her companion why the Crown Prince hated Lady Gabrielle so much. She was very beautiful. The other asked if she hadn't heard the rumors. These words piqued the heroine's interest, and she wondered what rumors they were talking about. The maid said that people claimed the Crown Prince liked men. That's why neither Lady Gabrielle nor other women appealed to him. Her companion asked how that could be true. It seemed strange since there was Miss Etienne. The other whispered that there were also rumors that Miss Etienne was just a cover. The heroine was utterly shocked by this, she thought. Have I been exposed? The maids continued gossiping. One said it was just nonsense. Whoever came up with it should write novels. Could such absurd rumors really circulate in the palace? After quite a long time, her second mentor finally returned to the heroine with books. She placed the stack in front of the girl and said she needed to memorize it all from start to finish. Then she laughed her irritating laugh again, which annoyed the heroine. She added that the girl should hold on to this book for today's studies. Etienne opened it and was horrified, she thought. Not a single picture, and the letters are so tiny. Even if I read all day, I'll never manage it. Lucy then added that at 7, they'd move on to dance practice. The girl decided her death was inevitable. But the heroine refused to give up and continued her studies. She firmly resolved to survive. While the girl studied, her second mentor went to report to the Crown Prince. Adrian asked the woman how his maid was doing, but she corrected His Highness, saying he shouldn't call her that. He should call her his fiancée. The man said, "Fine," and asked how his fiancée was doing. The woman smiled and said she was doing wonderfully. She then wondered where he had found such a delightful girl. The man, in turn, thought about her and asked what delightful girl she meant. But Lucy continued, saying she was very kind and followed instructions perfectly. She might not be as beautiful as Sir Essen, but she had her own charm, a uniqueness that made her utterly enchanting. From morning till night, she diligently worked to master various fields like etiquette, poetry, singing, dancing, music, history, and philosophy. She never once complained or abandoned her studies. She studied diligently, though it wasn't easy for her. His Highness turned to Diano, who approached and asked what His Majesty wanted. The man asked what he thought of Etienne. The young man paused to think. Then he said that, judging by how well she got along with people in the palace, he thought she wasn't bad, but he suggested observing her a bit longer. Adrian pondered this. He wondered if it was fine to leave it so calm when the ball was soon approaching. He was curious if it would go smoothly. If something went wrong, he'd have to marry that crazy woman, and that terrified him. After some time reflecting, he asked if there was any news about Essen. His subordinate said there was nothing yet. The prince thought, where has Essen gone off to? He then recalled one of their conversations. His disguised chosen one had asked how much longer he had to do this. Adrian had replied, "What do you mean, how much longer?" "It's obvious. Until I become emperor." The young man had asked if he could stop if he killed him. The prince had asked if that was treason against the crown, but the man shouted that he hadn't become a knight for this. The prince said he knew that, but he was still his knight, even in this form. Essen asked if he'd ever seen a knight in a dress. The prince replied that he'd be the first and should take it as an honor. His interlocutor asked if he was deliberately asking to die by his sword. but Adrian said he'd kill him first. Enraged, the man shouted that he'd had enough, tore off his veil, and disappeared after that conversation. The prince thought, who knew he'd actually run away? He remarked that he probably should have killed him then without hesitation. Right after, he thought all this had happened because of the empress and that girl. It was widely believed that Adrian hated women, but that wasn't true. He hated all people, regardless of gender or age. He wouldn't speak to anyone but his childhood friends if he had the choice. Some might think him shy, but those who knew him well would instantly disprove that. The empress had always been displeased with Adrian's attitude toward women. In truth, one reason for his hatred of humanity stemmed from being forced into an engagement as a child. One day, the empress issued a sudden decree, completely disregarding her son's opinion. She declared that if he didn't present a fiancé within a week, he would marry that girl. Adrian had countless reasons for disliking and resisting her, but one stood out the most. At 7 years old, that girl got upset that Adrian preferred horseback riding over playing with her. She took his horse and hid it, never saying where. Without food or water, the animal soon died. That girl forgot she had hidden the mare. When Adrian confronted her, she said something revolting. Did it just die? That was the turning point, after which Adrian began hating people, including that girl. He hastily arranged a week-long ball just to avoid marrying her, but all his efforts were in vain. The appointed week passed without results. The last remaining way to avoid marrying that girl was to disguise Essen and stage a fake engagement, without his consent, of course. Now the crown prince ordered his subordinate to find Essen and bring him back. The man said he understood and would do it. At that moment, someone addressed His Majesty, announcing that Albert had arrived from Grace Palace. The prince immediately thought, Grace is the Empress's palace. He told his butler to say he wasn't there. The man replied that Albert knew he was here. It was an order from Her Majesty the Empress. Lady Gabrielle had arrived, and the Empress wanted the prince to join them for tea. Meanwhile, the heroine was in her room when someone entered, greeting her as little sister. It was Tournier, asking if she had studied hard. The heroine replied that she had, sort of. Smiling, he told her to study harder if she didn't want to die. Just like that. She wondered what he meant. What kind of death was that? He continued, saying it was a great pity His Highness couldn't come, so he was there in his place. The heroine said she wasn't exactly sorry. She thought it would be much better if both of them disappeared from her life. The heroine stepped back a little from the young man, and he asked in surprise why she was avoiding him. He asked if he was that repulsive to her. Then he pretended to cry, saying his only little sister, Ati, was so cruel. The heroine thought she shouldn't fall for it and should just ignore him. Suddenly, their brief conversation was interrupted by Mentor Lucy. She clapped her hands and smiled, saying it was time to get started. It was time for the heroine's dance lesson, and her partner was Tourney. They took each other's hands, and he asked how she could hold his hand when she said he was repulsive. The heroine didn't reply. They began spinning in the dance, practicing their steps. Her partner told her they did well. The heroine thought her survival odds had finally increased. After the dance, the woman approached and smiled, saying they were better than she'd hoped. She asked the girl if she'd ever learned to dance. The heroine replied that she had a little. Before her family's misfortune, she'd done some. This saddened her Sobesednica. The girl thought she didn't really care back then, but now the situation was far more catastrophic. The young man approached his little sister, took her hand, and told her everything would be fine. He added that their family was safe now. She wasn't alone anymore. The heroine thought she'd prefer to be alone. Her partner then said they'd stop for today. He had to report to the boss. The heroine looked at him in surprise. He continued that it was time to go. The heroine thought these two were odd. They'd only done one waltz and were already done. Clearly, they must hate this too. Moments later, she was left alone in the room as the door slammed shut behind them. But suddenly, Tourney returned and asked with a smile why she was just standing there. She was coming with him. The heroine wondered what nonsense he was spouting now. At that moment, he grabbed her hand and dragged her along. As they walked, he asked why he was so repulsive when he'd even washed his hands well. The girl thought she just wanted them to leave her alone. At the same time, the crown prince arrived at the place he'd been summoned to, but he saw something that infuriated him and decided he'd been tricked. There was the girl he was supposed to marry. Seeing him, she immediately smiled and greeted His Highness, saying she'd missed him terribly. But Adrian turned to leave. He thought the Empress's order had forced him to come, but there was no need to stay without her. Seeing this, the girl asked where His Highness was going. She asked if her glance had embarrassed him, making him run away. The prince stopped and gave her a cold stare. She continued, saying it was all pointless. She felt the same way he did about His Highness. Now they no longer needed to hide their feelings. The man thought that lately, the Empress had been constantly trying to throw them together. If this continued, he wouldn't be able to move for months whenever his mother summoned him. His Sobasednica then said that if he left like this, Her Majesty the Empress would be very upset. She also told His Highness that the Empress had asked her to pass on a message. The prince wondered in surprise what she wanted to convey. The girl continued, saying that if he wasn't here when Her Majesty returned, she would prepare an even grander gift for him. At that moment, he realized he was in a completely disadvantageous position. He then sat down at the table and took a teacup in his hands. Gabrielle asked how long it had been since they'd last seen each other. She said he must have missed her so much that he couldn't sleep at night. Just like her. The man replied that he hadn't done that at all. She then said that His Highness had just admitted he missed her too, or had she misheard? She added that she understood even without words. He told her it wasn't like that at all. His Sobasednica continued, saying that excessive denial was full agreement. He had missed her terribly. While they discussed this, they heard someone approaching. They immediately turned their attention to these people. There, they saw the heroine standing with the crown prince's subordinates, Diano and Turnii. They all exchanged glances with one another. Looking at them, Adrian wondered what fresh situation had just arisen. To understand what happened, we need to step back briefly. The heroine and her mentor had come to Adrian to report that Atienne danced very well. In the study, they found only Diano. The young man asked where their leader had gone. His Sobasednik replied that she was here. Turnii asked who he was talking about. Diano said that girl had shown up. Turnii was shocked and asked if that girl had really come. Diano explained that Her Majesty the Empress was holding a tea party with her and had invited His Highness too. The mentor immediately looked at the heroine with a smile. She didn't understand what he wanted or why he was looking at her like that. But moments later, he said it was finally her time to shine. The girl asked what he meant by that. Then the three of them rushed to Madame Lucy. She was shocked that they'd arrived so quickly and asked if they'd finished with the storage already. But they told her that wasn't important right now. That girl had appeared. It was finally time for their Ati to step forward. Lucy gave her Sobasednik a wicked smile. She said she understood now. Since Lady Gabrielle was here, of course, Miss Etienne had to be present too. The heroine asked who this Gabrielle was. The woman asked if she didn't know her. She was the Chancellor's only daughter. The heroine said she knew that, but it wasn't so simple. Now she understood that the girl they'd been talking about was Gabrielle. Lucy explained that Lady Gabrielle was a young woman from the house of Valeriro. They were relatives of the Dowager Empress through the maternal line and the infamous House of Nebel. Thanks to this, she enjoyed the Dowager Empress's favor. But as a person, she was rather lacking. The heroine thought Madame Lucy didn't seem to like Gabrielle much. She also thought she knew Gabrielle came from an extremely wealthy family. The Nebel's obsession with money was so well known that even commoners were aware of it. The girl knew that, moreover. Most of their family's treasures had gone to the Nebel family during their decline. So, Gabrielle was the only daughter of that family. Lucy continued, saying Gabrielle's reputation wasn't great, but she was still popular in high society. The heroine said she understood now. Turney smiled and said everything was fine, calling her little sister. Their family was far more prestigious. The mentor told the girl she needed to prepare herself mentally. The heroine asked what she had to prepare for. Lucy said, of course, for appearing before His Highness, the Crown Prince. The girl grew scared and asked why she had to do that. The woman added that she was his fiancée. She had to steal His Highness back from Lady Gabrielle. Turney agreed it was true. The heroine thought, why? I don't want him. Let her have him. The mentor then shouted for her to get up quickly and treat it as a rehearsal for the ball. After brief preparations, the heroine set off with her mentors to see the prince. On the way, her older brother stopped and told his sister everything would be fine. They were with her. The girl thought it didn't sound very motivating. Diano stopped too and asked them to wait. He then pulled out a veil and handed it to the girl, saying she should take it. Essen had always worn one. The heroine immediately took it and put it on her head. Finally, all preparations were complete, and they could head out calmly. After a while, they arrived at their planned destination, and the heroine immediately spotted them. The crown prince sat across from a smiling girl, his hand already on his sword ready to draw. Seeing this, Turney shouted that they needed to hurry before the sword left its sheath. The heroine locked eyes with that girl, she thought. So that's her? She also noticed the girl's expression darkened sharply, likely because the heroine had disrupted their moment. She then thought, if only she knew I came here with these two under threat of death. Sometime later, Etienne joined their tea party. Both of her so-called helpers abandoned her. Diano said his sword was left alone on the training grounds and was probably crying without him. Tournier said he had urgent business. Did he forget to turn off the lights in his room? The heroine thought they were traitors. They'd promised to support her. As a result, it was just the three of them now. The heroine felt uncomfortable, thinking how tense it was there. The prince remarked that it had been a while since he'd seen her, addressing Lady Etienne. He added that his fiancée must be very busy. Gabrielle asked what busy meant. The heroine thought, I'm right here hearing this. The girl continued saying, Her Majesty the Empress had invited her to dine with her. She asked if His Highness would join them. The man said, Of course not. His Sobesednitsa noted that if he was so busy, she hoped they could enjoy dinner together next time. He thought, I didn't say I was busy. After sipping her tea, she slammed the cup on the table and called to the servant that the tea was cold and needed to be replaced. The servant agreed to bring a new one immediately. Gabrielle said this tea could only be bought through the Nobel family. She had prepared it specially for His Highness. The man said nothing, ignoring her as usual. They brought her new tea and she took a sip again. Once more, she slammed the cup down sharply and asked who had brewed this tea, demanding that person come to her immediately. The heroine wondered what was wrong now. Looking at the cup, she thought she saw no issues and it had a pleasant aroma. The servant approached. Gabrielle asked if she had brewed it. The servant confirmed she had. Gabrielle shouted that these were different tea leaves. Couldn't she do anything right? Then the girl took her cup and poured the hot tea on the servant. The heroine was shocked by what she saw, thinking, What is she doing? The heroine tried to say something to the girl but stopped after a few words. Meanwhile, the servant was already on her knees, begging for forgiveness and pleading for mercy. Gabrielle shouted at her to do things properly if she didn't want her father and whole family fired. The servant continued begging for mercy, addressing her mistress. The girl raised her cup and swung it at the servant, shouting that she'd do something because of her now. But at that very moment, the heroine couldn't take it anymore and rushed to stop her. The girl asked what she was doing. Etienne said she thought she was overreacting right now. Of course, the maid had made a mistake, but couldn't she be more lenient? Her Sobesednitsa asked if she was saying she wasn't lenient. After all, this was her personal servant. So, how she punished her was her own business. She asked if that wasn't the case or if she misunderstood something. The heroine listened carefully and looked at the servant's wounded hands. Then she turned to her interlocutor and said that, first and foremost, she was also a human being. These words greatly impressed Gabrielle. She hadn't expected to hear such a thing. Meanwhile, the crown prince sat and listened to the two girls talking. The girl then asked the heroine what she had just said. The heroine replied that she had said the maid was also a human being. So, while punishing mistakes was necessary, a master's nobility also required showing great magnanimity. Her Sobesednitsa asked Lady Etienne if she had her eye on her maid. She added that she didn't understand why the lady was defending this girl so much. The heroine said that if Lady Gabrielle had scolded the servant privately, she wouldn't have intervened. But it seems she forgot that His Majesty, the Crown Prince, was present here. Pointing at him, she asked if she didn't think she was acting rather rudely in front of His Highness. The man sat and listened carefully to their conversation. He thought it was quite clever of the girl. She wielded words skillfully and could even get angry at the same time. Gabrielle had always stood out since childhood. She hit maids with rings and forced those she particularly disliked to wear strange rags. Adrien didn't like that Gabrielle allowed herself to insult others, but he never interfered. That was because he was simply used to it all. Yet he couldn't understand why she did such things right in front of him. Then the man set down his drink and said that was enough. He asked if they didn't realize the outcome was already obvious. Hearing his address, the girls immediately turned toward His Highness. Adrien said he thought the girl seemed tired today. Because of that, he thought it would be better for her to just go home. She asked what he was talking about. He continued, saying he would inform the Empress himself. Suddenly, a butler approached and addressed Lady Nobel, saying he would escort her out of the imperial palace. The girl had no choice but to obey the prince's will. The butler then led her away, leaving the heroine alone with the crown prince. With that girl gone, the heroine breathed a sigh of relief. Then she and Adrien exchanged glances. She looked at the man with a rather gentle gaze. She immediately apologized to him, saying she had been too presumptuous, but he replied that it wasn't so. Everything was fine now. The frightened girl looked up, and moments later she saw the man even smile slightly. He told her to keep going like this. Surprised, she asked what he meant. He added that he'd said she should continue in the same way. Then he leaned close and whispered that he was the only one whose opinion she shouldn't worry about. Some time passed after that moment. The butler knocked on His Highness's study and addressed him, saying Her Highness was calling for him. But the man didn't want to go and told him to say he'd gone hunting. The butler added that the Empress knew he wasn't hunting or handling state affairs, nor was he training with a sword, so she had ordered him to come to her immediately. The man was shocked by this. Those were his top 3 most frequent excuses up until now. After that day, the Empress had summoned him countless times, but he always brushed her off. At that moment, Diano was in the man's room. The Crown Prince looked at him, inviting him to act. Diano understood what to do. He immediately addressed the butler, saying it was very rude. His Highness was about to go train. They were just discussing new tactics and were heading to the training grounds. He added that he apologized to the Dowager Empress, but His Highness had duties to fulfill. The butler sighed deeply. He was quite fed up with this and said he'd relay it as such. Because of this, Adrian turned to his subordinate and said he'd done well. The young man smiled and asked if that meant he'd train with him. The prince replied coldly that, of course not. This upset the young man, who asked what they'd do now since they'd already told the Empress. The prince added that it was true. The subordinate then remarked to His Highness that it had been a week since their last sparring session. He asked if they shouldn't have crossed swords yesterday. The man thought, "He's never beaten me even once." Then he handed him a stack of papers and said that if he dealt with all this in half an hour, they'd train. The young man immediately agreed and thanked His Majesty. The prince sat thinking he definitely wouldn't finish. It was his cunning plan to avoid doing anything. But after a short time, the sparring happened anyway. The subordinate managed to finish in the brief time the prince had given him. Now they fought each other on the training grounds. The heroine was also at this place. This was because she'd been grabbed and brought here right after her lesson ended. The person who grabbed and led her was Turney. Despite the fight, the heroine thought that, judging by his form, he wielded the sword well. A sword like that could easily slit her throat. Now she thought her chances of death had risen by a few %. The sparring lasted a short time and finally ended. Adrian won, holding his sword over his opponent. Suddenly, Turney shouted that he felt sorry. It had been so close to a win. Such a chance came once in a lifetime. The men immediately turned their attention to him. The heroine asked if he wasn't His Majesty's assistant. Diano, in turn, said that, as expected, he couldn't compare to His Highness. Adrian said it was only because he acted carelessly and smiled too much. His opponent replied that it was because he was happy. Being so close to His Highness was thrilling. Then he turned his gaze to the heroine and asked what she was doing here. Her mentor said she was smarter than she seemed and had finished her lessons early. The Crown Prince smiled at this and asked if that was true. He added that they'd test it later. After a while, he looked at the girl more closely and saw her thoughtful expression. He recalled the moment when the heroine had spoken with Gabrielle. Then he remarked that she was angry. The girl asked what he was talking about, saying there was no such thing. She thought, what is he even saying right now? The man asked what was causing her such discomfort. The heroine thought that everything bothered her, especially him. But she just smiled and said there was nothing like that. The Crown Prince exhaled and said that was good. He didn't need discontent around him. The heroine wondered how much longer her life would remain in danger. At that moment, Turney said it had been such a long and tough day. Diano added that it had been hard for him too. His interlocutor agreed, saying it was true because His Highness was such a difficult person. One ran around all day on his orders, while another suffered in sword training. The interlocutor said he'd enjoyed His Highness mercilessly attacking him as if he wanted to kill him, but he'd been less focused than usual. Turney added that it might be because he'd gotten too good, or perhaps the prince's skills were regressing from lack of practice. The man grew furious at these words, and the heroine saw it. She thought, enough already, stop spouting such nonsense. But right after those words, they decided to get out of there and fled immediately. This left the heroine alone with a very angry crown prince. The man turned his head toward her and asked if she had eaten. She said she hadn't yet. Her chosen one then said they should go. The girl asked where they were going. He sighed and remarked that he still didn't like slow thinkers. The girl didn't understand at first, but then realized what he meant. Sometime later, they went to eat together at the same table. They sat across from each other, the table overflowing with various foods. The man noticed the girl was barely eating and asked if it wasn't to her taste. She replied that it wasn't that. It was all wonderful. The man noticed the girl was barely eating and asked if it wasn't to her taste. She replied that it wasn't that. It was all wonderful. He then wondered why she was eating so slowly. The heroine said it was her first time eating such food. She'd never tasted anything better. At those words, he just looked at the girl. Suddenly, a servant approached and spoke to him briefly. The heroine wanted to listen to what they'd say, but the man told her to just eat. The heroine then started eating and wondered if this was how the crown prince showed care. She told the man she'd enjoy the meal. After that, she continued her meal, eating quite delicately. The crown prince watched his chosen one eat, noticing every detail. Suddenly, another servant addressed His Highness. The man asked what he wanted. The servant approached closely and whispered something in his ear. Adrian told the man he understood and would come by later. The servant said he understood and would inform Her Majesty. After that, the man turned his attention to the heroine and said he'd escort her. The girl stood up, thinking he'd just tell her to go. She asked him if he didn't need to leave now. He said that was true, but she wondered why he was escorting her then. He replied that he was afraid she'd run away. Sometime later, Lucy spoke to Lady Etienne. The girl asked what she wanted from her. Lucy asked what their schedule was for today. The girl mentioned the schedule, thinking it was just studying as usual, but Lucy immediately shouted that that wasn't right. The heroine wondered what she wanted, and the woman continued, saying something interesting awaited them today. That interesting thing was a trip to Grace Palace. The heroine was shocked and asked what she was talking about. She grew even more horrified and thought, Grace Palace is the Empress's palace. Now she feared that today might be the day of her death. She thought that if she'd known in advance, she would have slept longer today. She also thought she didn't need this. She'd soon sleep forever, so what was the point of sleeping more? The heroine asked her mentor if she really had to go, but Lucy smiled and said, of course it was necessary. Why ask such obvious questions? Her Majesty was expecting the girl. Then Lucy grabbed her and said they needed to prepare as quickly as possible. The preparations moved along very quickly. The girl asked her mentor if she'd go there with His Highness. She thought he was useless, but it was still better than facing Her Majesty alone. Lucy said he wouldn't be there. Her Majesty had secretly summoned only her, Lady Etienne. She added that it was such a great honor for her, but the heroine was already disappointed, thinking she didn't need their honor. After a short time, everything was finally ready. Madame Lucy said this was her craftsmanship. The girl looked simply stunning. She added that the girl was the best. The heroine said she'd go then. She stepped out of her room and saw a man in front of her. Looking up, she realized it was the crown prince. As he saw her, the man immediately asked where she was going. The heroine hesitated with her answer. She wondered if she could even tell him that Her Majesty had summoned her secretly. The man said he hated most when people made him repeat questions twice. He leaned in and repeated where she was going. The girl grew even more frightened and hesitated again. She thought, why is he so persistent today? Suddenly, her mentor appeared and greeted His Highness. Then she told him the girl was going to an audience with Her Highness. The Empress had summoned her herself. Hearing this, the heroine thought, couldn't she have said that earlier? The man then asked if his mother had summoned her. The girl confirmed it was so. He warned her that if she was lying, he wouldn't let it slide. The heroine thought it was all true, and she knew it. The crown prince then said he was a bit uneasy. He added that she should go and confidently answer yes to every question. The heroine said she understood and would unconditionally answer yes. The prince then said he was leaving. The girl rushed off in another direction, thinking she needed to get away quickly. But her chosen one stopped her, saying she was going the wrong way. She thought, so I need to go the other way, and rushed there. But the man said she was going the wrong way again. He sighed deeply and told her to just follow him. Sometime later, they finally arrived. The heroine admired the interior, thinking the patterns on the doors were probably gold. She wondered what would happen if she stole a piece. She could live off the proceeds her whole life. The prince told her not to stand in the way and approach the entrance door. The heroine asked if he was going in with her. He said yes. Why else would he have dragged himself there? The girl told him to listen. She was supposed to meet Her Majesty one-on-one, but her chosen one wouldn't hear anything at that moment. He opened the door, shocking the heroine. After that, they entered the Empress's room together. The woman was sitting in her chair and saw her son barge in with his chosen one. Moments later, the Empress smiled and told Lady Adiane to come in quickly. Seeing her, the heroine immediately grew frightened and flustered at that moment. Then she remembered what she had to do. She bowed and greeted Her Highness the Empress, adding, "May the blessings of Arcangelo be with you." The Empress replied, "May the blessings of Arcangelo be with you too." Then she added for them to sit. The man and the heroine sat down at the table together. Smiling, the woman asked why she didn't recall inviting her son here. The prince simply turned his head aside and didn't answer. She sighed and said her son was so stubborn he couldn't even lift his head. Then she asked how long it had been since they'd last seen Lady Etienne. Recalling what the crown prince had said before the meeting, the heroine replied that it was so. Adrian asked his mother why she had summoned her, but she said it didn't concern him. The man said she was his fiancée, though. The Empress was very surprised and immediately asked her servant if she had heard that. Smiling, the servant confirmed she had. The prince had clearly said she was his fiancée. More genres are coming soon. Subscribe to unlock them all.